a very intentional statement that Paul makes. He says, listen, you have been called to liberty, but don't only not use your liberty as an opportunity for the flesh. If you're taking notes, write down 1 Peter 2:16. 1 Peter 2:16, Peter talking to the Jewish Christians, he's talking about submission to one another, submission to government. And in the midst of his instruction to them, he tells them, live as free. Only do not allow your freedom to be a cloak for vice. Who knows what a cloak is? What is a cloak for? Cover up. Vice, a wickedness, or selfish self-indulgence and sin. And so Peter gives this, I like the way Peter says it, at least the way New King James calls it a cloak, because you see, if we're not careful, family, we'll allow our freedom to be a cover-up for something that we really want to get into, or I should say the flesh side, not us and the spirit man in us, but the flesh want to get into. So Paul gives us a warning in Galatians 5:13. He also gives, write these two scriptures down. 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 12. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 23. I've heard this before. He says, everything is lawful for me, but not everything is helpful. Everything is lawful for me, but not everything is profitable or is edifying.
Right.
And Paul says in chapter 6 of 1 Corinthians, verse 12, he said, I will not be enslaved by anything. Mm-hmm. You see, Paul knew something, family. Either it was by experience or the revelation, the insight from Jesus. Because Paul talks in his word, he said, look, I didn't receive my message from man. I received it from God. So if he got it directly from God, and as he speaks in his word, it has to be the purest word. So I have to believe that God imparted into him, if not for himself, some experiences that he would have to teach, he would have to instruct, he would have to encourage, he would have to advise. So he says, though we are free, though I can partake in this, though I can partake in that, it is all these things that might be lawful for me is not helpful. It does not edify. And he says in verse 12, the second part of verse 12, he says, I will not be enslaved by anything. See, when Christ came to set us free, he came to set us free from the works of the law. He came to set us free from sin, from that enslavement to sin. Christ said, okay, I will now give you the law of the Spirit of life, and through that it has made you free. Free from what, the question is? It is free from sin. So when Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 12, that I will not be entangled or in bondage to anything again, he's referencing what Christ has done for him. Christ has freed me from sin. I'm not going to allow myself to get back in that vice again, in that bondage, in that enslavement to sin. And Paul talks about it again in verse 13 in Galatians 5.